All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth ever episode of our UPE podcast series, a series for UPE members by UPE and the Alumni Committee. So each episode, we will be having an amazing guest or two on air as they share their stories, experiences, and insights for all of our listeners' pleasures. So the specific topic for today's podcast is recruitment and job searching. My name is Yili. I will be your host for today. And today I'm joined with Mark Tai and James Wang, two esteemed UPE UCLA alumni. Mark and James, it is great to have you here today. How are you guys doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, woke up early, had a good brunch, and then now I'm doing this wonderfully arranged and organized session.
Yeah, likewise. Pretty hyped to do this, and I'm actually getting food afterwards, so kind of envious of your brunch. But otherwise, yeah, ready to talk and have a good conversation.
Awesome, great to hear. So I guess before we begin talking about our subject, would you guys be able to give a short introduction about yourself, including your graduation year, current company, and what your involvements were in UPE when you were a student?
Yeah, I guess I can open up. So I graduated in 2018. I'm currently working at Roblox. I've been working here for a few months now. Prior to that, I was working for Microsoft. And at UPE, I was part of the tutoring committee.
Yep. I graduated in 2018 as well. In UCLA UPE, I was the web chair, and I've been at Airbnb for the past 4 years. Oh, I'm on the CI infrastructure team.
Super cool. Yeah, awesome. So I guess we have a lot to talk about today. So let's just dive right on in to the first section, which is job searching. So Mark and James, I know you guys mentioned your companies, but how did you end up applying there?
Can I field this one first, or do you want to go for it, Mark? All right.
Hi, James.
Cool. So my current company is Roblox. Like I just mentioned, I started working there a few months ago, and I actually applied at the recommendation of someone else that I knew from UCLA that currently works here as well. Basically, when I was kind of on the hunt for a new job from Microsoft, I was taking a look at where a lot of my colleagues and friends from UCLA and elsewhere were currently working. And I sort of just started there as a list of places that I knew would be interesting to work for. Obviously, you have the go-to places like the FANG that everyone wants to work for out of college. But there are also a lot of really cool startups and smaller companies that I didn't know about before that got me interested. And Roblox was one of them. It had a lot of like really good reviews from coworkers. It was pretty good reputation-wise. There were a lot of good things about it, and my friend recommended it, so that's how I ended up applying. There are some other great places like Limbix, Samsara. These are all like much smaller companies I never heard about before that several of my friends have been working for the past few years. I also got interested in and applied to as well. So that's really the main process. Get a curated list, and then extend that list with people that you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a somewhat similar story. My sister actually recommended me to Airbnb.
Nice.
And then that's how I got my internship. And then I really enjoyed my team. I really enjoyed the work we were doing. I really enjoyed Airbnb as a company. And so that's why I've been here for the past 4 years since graduating. But I know from my friends and peers that generally the way they find new jobs and jobs that they're interested in is they already know someone there, or they have some connection or some networked way of knowing about the company and what it's like beforehand, and even that's how they get exposure to the companies typically. I know my housemate previously was at Robinhood, but now he just switched to a new company, and he basically knew from his Robinhood network a whole list of startups that are the size that he was looking for, basically.
Yeah, for sure. That makes a lot of sense. I guess you guys both mentioned a lot about knowing people from different places, and that's how that led you guys to applying. So also on that type of note, I was wondering how important are recommendations and referrals from people you know?
hugely.
What Mark said, it's very important, I'd say. Because if you really think about it, when companies are hiring applicants, there's a massive, massive pool of applicants. So many that like there's a multitude of people that would be perfectly qualified and fit in well at their company that they just won't hire just because they don't see them at the right time. And like beyond that, there's like people that are less qualified or even less experienced. And it's a really, really massive undertaking in order to kind of sift through these and get them like interviewed. Not to mention the interview process itself, which is very time consuming and expensive on the company side in terms of engineering hours and stuff like that. So in that sense, referrals are incredibly important because it skips a lot of just the pre-filter, so to speak. Just by coming through that path, you're kind of already vetted by someone who's already on the inside, which is really, really easy for streamlining things. When I was doing my job hunt for that I ended up at Roblox for, I was in the final rounds for a lot of companies and mentioned I was in the final rounds, and someone that I know that works for Snapchat basically got me straight to the final round because I already had offers from other places. And that wouldn't necessarily have happened if like I didn't know him from before and maintain that relationship. So I'd say referrals are really, really important. And to kind of build onto the next question, which I'm sure is coming, which is how to get these kinds of referrals. My biggest recommendation is to build your network as much as possible while you're in UCLA. That's a great chance to do that. That's where like a lot of my connections are. If you really think about it, every single person that you meet in college will be working somewhere, and you never know where they'll end up or when like your paths will cross again outside of work. The guy that referred to me to Roblox didn't originally work for Roblox when he left college, and we didn't meet at all like in the context of like career fairs or even UPE. It was just we just managed to like shared a meal at one point and just talked about stuff. And so like I definitely think that that's like a really, really important part of maximizing your college experience for success later on.
Yes, absolutely. Something I'd like to mention that I think a lot of people when they're first starting their job hunts and getting familiar with the whole process is that they don't realize that companies don't actually need a good filter of all candidates. Like they have to filter, like a bad hire is much more expensive than losing a good hire for companies. And so like the technical interviews, the entire interview process is geared towards making sure there's clear signal that the person that makes it through all of this is a very good candidate, rather than making sure all good candidates make it through the process. And that's a fundamental mind shift difference of like meritocracy to some degree, but that's just how companies have optimized for making sure they have the right workforce with the minimal amount of effort from them. And referrals are a huge signal that this candidate is probably good enough to at least get a expedited interview, because like, yes, as James said, someone that's already made it through has vetted them and like at least speaks for them a little bit. Concretely, in my experience, a recommendation is worth a perfect resume, in the fact that it will get you at least into the interview pipeline, or maybe even expedited into the later steps of the interview pipeline. And it's largely equivalent to just having a perfect resume that the recruiter loves. But then afterwards, you still generally need to go through like and actually pass all the interview stages. And so that's still a good meritocracy, at least.
Yeah. So to build on that, like I completely agree with like all the facts that you just presented there, or all the takes that you just presented there. A recommendation in and of itself isn't really going to get you the job. I've been referred to many places and I have failed to interview at those places. Some of them were legitimately because I had a bad day and I just didn't interview properly. And others were because they ended up just finding a candidate that was more suited for the position or something like that. And this really comes down to the fundamental mind shift that you need to do when you're searching for a job. And so like what Mark said about companies rejecting good hires more often, like the fact that a bad hire is really bad for a company means that they're going to reject hires like good people more often, right? And that's both good and bad, because from the interviewee side, you're thinking, man, like I'm good. I only get to interview for these dream places maybe once or twice every year if I'm lucky. And, you know, just because I didn't nail like the question 100% perfectly, I'm getting passed over, even though like in 99% of cases, that'd be good. But the flip side of that is this lets you kind of take rejection way more favorably than you maybe otherwise would. I know for me, when I was first starting off in college and interviewing at all these places and being super nervous, I would get rejected a lot, and it would really like eat away at my self-esteem and confidence, because I thought I was good. And in reality, like I was like pretty good, but because like people are like companies are more hesitant to bite on you, then like it just, the success rate wasn't really reflecting that, right? But the important thing is like, just because you don't get an offer doesn't mean that you're like bad at interviewing or you'd be a bad engineer or anything like that. In fact, the fact that you get an interview at all is already a very good sign. And so like anytime you go into an interview, you should think of it as like a chance to succeed. And at the very least, get some interview practice as opposed to, oh man, like I really got to nail this, or like I got to have 100% success rate on all my interviews, or else like I'm not good. And I know that's like a mindset that myself and a lot of peers, especially in college, kind of got into, that I'd really like to encourage students to not fall into if they can. Sorry, I was rambling a little bit.
Oh,
No, I
no
entirely agree,
worries.
James. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too. I think those are super great points, and kind of like going off of what Mark was talking about with filtering out candidates. I guess one of the like first things that companies do is look at a resume when they're filtering out, if you don't have a referral at least. So I guess, do you guys have any tips on making sure that your resume stands out during that filtering process?
The
Oh,
honest truth that I have is that you need a good company on your resume to get interviewed at good companies. And it's much, much, much easier to pass a resume check if you have a big name, reputable company, like essentially the Fang, or I believe the new name is now Manga in the subreddit, at least, because
manga.
Facebook changed to Meta. But yeah, that's by far the easiest way to make your resume actually work. If you don't have that, which we all were at one point, you should definitely highlight your passion, your interest, and your actual technical skills with computer science. Like I've done a lot of resume reviews, and like I feel like I have a pretty good sense of like what captures a person's interest in computer science well, and that's very important if you don't have a strong, reputable company already on your resume. So like honestly doing like things like side projects or like things that aren't required out of curriculum, including just like extracurricular activities like ACM or any of the hackathons, and actually doing something that seems like you're interested in it, it seems like you're interested in learning, seems like you put those two together and you learn to build something cool. I always appreciate seeing that in a resume, at least.
Yeah. So I don't have as much experience with reading resumes from like the hirer's perspective, but I can definitely say that I made some edits to my resume like while I was applying to jobs last year, and there was a distinctive improvement in response rate for me after I made those changes to my resume. I think first of all, I guess I'll address Mark's main point of you want to make sure, like it definitely helps a lot if you have a big name company. And the question might be like, how do I actually get that big name company? And that's really like the really tough obstacle that I feel like a lot of college students will be running into, because it really does get easier once you get a reputable company under your belt. Again, it has to do with that vetting process where it's like, this guy works for Google. Man, that must mean that Google like liked him enough to like hire him. So that means that if you're good enough for Google, chances are you're going to be good enough for any company that's out there. And that's not really a bad heuristic from the company's perspective. What you can do in order to get past this hump as a college student, first of all, if you can qualify for like the special programs like Microsoft Explore internship or I don't remember, I think it's like the Google Engineering Practicum for Google, or like any of these special programs. I highly encourage you guys to apply to those. And then making sure that, like, again, you're taking on side projects, but not just like random side projects. I think a pitfall that a lot of students fall into is they just join these arbitrary things, and then they don't like really care about it, and then they just write it on their resume in the hope that someone bites on them so that they can get that first big name company. Unfortunately, that won't really work, because I tried and it definitely doesn't work that way. And I think once I like joined UPE and like started doing tutoring and stuff like that, and things that I cared a lot more about, that really showed a lot more, both when in my resume and when I was being asked about these kinds of questions. Beyond that, early on, I think having a really good GPA without a doubt helps. The higher your GPA, the better it is, because really, unfortunately, early on, there's not too many other things that you can be judged by. Also, I don't know if this is like too early for some of you guys, but going for a freshman internship is definitely not impossible. A lot of my colleagues had freshman internships, and that helped them a massive amount in terms of sophomore year internships, because not just because like, like they have an internship and I didn't, but they also showed the initiative to go chase something like that for their freshman year. And that's kind of the advantage of a freshman internship, which is by demonstrating that initiative, it doesn't actually really matter too much where you work at. It doesn't have to be at like a big name company or anything like that. Just the very fact that you have one at that time really sets you apart. Now, it's not too late if you're not a freshman and you don't have an internship, but just goes to show that you'll need to like put a lot of effort into like a real extracurricular project. Finally, in terms of resume stuff, something that I did out of college, and this is not going to be relevant for college students, this will be more relevant for people who are out in industry, is you're going to want to move your GPA from the top of your resume underneath your actual work experience. I think if you don't do that and you've been in industry for a little while, that's probably a red flag. Because I forgot to do that for my resume, and I didn't really get any responses for a good amount of time. And as soon as I did that and like made that change alongside some other like rewordings to better demonstrate like the impact of my work, all of a sudden like it was as if like a faucet turned on, and that was without like factoring in referrals whatsoever. So yeah.
Huh. That's super interesting, especially with like your advice about moving your GPA down to the bottom once you get like move on later into your career. I guess going on a little bit back to what you were talking about in the interviews, when you're talking about interviews and passing and failing them, I guess that's like a pretty big part about making sure that you get an offer. So have you guys ever conducted interviews before for your companies? And if so, what do you look at when evaluating candidates?
I have not, so this is all Mark.
Yeah, I've been doing interviews at Airbnb basically ever since I started. I think they're a lot of fun, and it gives me a lot of practice and a lot of exposure to the different interview styles that are in the wild. And so I have great context on this. I also have a write-up on how I do this in more detail, but maybe that'll be shared differently. So basically, let me actually reference my write-up. The biggest thing about an interview is the execution, where how fast and how cleanly and how completely are you completing the problem in implementation. Of course, you need to have the algorithm mapped out before you get to executing. So obviously, logical reasoning is a huge part as well. But honestly, like when I'm conducting an interview, I will give tips and hints for getting the algorithm on the right track, just so I can see the main important part of the interview, the execution. So as I've written down here, I think like the execution is like around 40% of the value of an interview, and like the logical reasoning is like 20. The next thing is communication, which is around 20%, where like I need to see that you are receptive to feedback, you are communicating your approach well, there's no big issues, and like how I would like envision you as a teammate, and if I would want to work with you and communicate with you day to day. Then the next two smaller things are like code quality and programming language proficiency, which are kind of related, but we do not want to see poor code quality coming out in an interview. If there are definitely many shortcuts you are encouraged to take, but you need to acknowledge them as I am taking this shortcut in the constraints of this interview timeframe. For example, naming your functions like function one or your variables like or like word one or something like that. Terrible. Huge red flags. I've actually failed people's interviews for that, along with a few other things. But that's probably the biggest mistake people make coming from college, where code quality isn't nearly as important, or like you feel it might not be as important in moving to software engineering, where code quality is the number one thing of making sure your code is maintainable for a long time. Maybe number two, but yeah. The last one is programming language proficiency. A little bit tricky to do from college, but it's basically how well you know your language, with the premise of that if you deeply understand your language, you'll probably be able to pick up other languages well, and that also applies to your understanding of computer science in whole. The last thing I would recommend for programming or for interviews is that I highly recommend you learning Python 3 from scratch and then doing all of your interviews in that. It saves you like 5 to 15 minutes in an interview context when you need so many primitives around strings, arrays, sets, like they're all just built in. For instance, one of the interview questions I ask requires a permutation in generating them for one of the possible approaches. Literally just import it in Python.
Yeah,
and it's just done.
That's not trivial in C++.
Precisely. Like I tell candidates, hey, this is like some standard libraries. Feel free to look up an implementation, but like Python 3 saves you time in interviews, which makes you look faster. Like I'll be honest, like I finished some interviews in like 20 minutes out of like 40 just because I imported something in Python and it just did the job and everyone was happy. Like I demonstrated understanding of my language. I demonstrated reducing code duplication or deduplicating my code by just using the standard library. It's just Python is an amazing language. Again, like I know C++ is what is generally taught in UCLA. Don't try that for interviews. Just learn Python.
Yeah, so I have a very interesting perspective for this because I actually did my last round of interviews last year in C++. And having done that in C++, I would probably still recommend that you pick up Python and learn it front and back. I didn't. The main reason why was because I just always done my interviews in C++. I did them like throughout all of college. And so when it came time to do like leak code and stuff like that, I just kind of went back to my comfort pick of C++ because that's, even though I never actually even used it in industry, I used C# in industry. For interview problems, I was using C++. And it definitely will save you a lot of time if you understand like the Python libraries in and out. I was certainly burned on more than one occasion because there was like some off by one error or something that I had to implement in C++ that like wasted 10 minutes of my time. And if you like really get the question really fast, then you could definitely blitz through it in C++ and look really awesome, like really cool, because C++ is not an easy language to interview in. And so like for the ones that I was able to do that, people were like, whoa, like how'd you just did that in C++? That's kind of crazy. Like you're kind of nuts. That's really cool. But then like you obviously don't want to know the answer to a question and then fumble in what Mark said was the execution phase, which remember is 40% of the interview, just because like you forgot the library function or something like that. That would be like a very painful thing, and that did happen to me a couple of times, unfortunately. So yeah, Python, again, I highly recommend it. I'm probably going to be learning it before I do my next round of interviews, which is hopefully a number of years in the future. But yeah, that's pretty good. And spoken from like the interviewee side, when it comes to the topic of interviews, I'd pretty much agree with Mark's assessment as well. If I do an interview and I'm unable to solve the technical question, then like I feel like my own chances of success go again like way down, because remember that companies are doing this like we're gonna reject potentially good people, so you really do have to kind of play it pretty well. Now granted, I will say like I've been accepted to places where I didn't get the full answer for everything, or like it wasn't perfectly like the time complexity wasn't perfect, or there's a couple of things that I didn't really know. But in those cases, I just said like, oh, I don't actually know too much, but here's like my educated guess. And typically interviewers were pretty happy with that because it demonstrates like the critical thinking and communication portions of the interview, right? But like if they give you like the first technical question, then you'll definitely want to get it right. Another trick, by the way, especially if you're going for full-time jobs versus internships, is that interviewers will like to lead with a very easy initial question where like if you like stumble on this question, you're going to have a lot of trouble to like succeeding in the interview. And usually this question will be something that you can do in maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And if you get it, they'll set you up, they'll like hit you with the real question that is related to the setup question. A lot of interviewers really like this style because if you get stuck on that first question, then they don't even need to bother with asking the harder question. So definitely be wary of that. For example, I guess I shouldn't say, right, because NDA, but a company that I interviewed for asked me like a very simple, like, oh, like print out like these letters for like an attendance record. And then after I solved that in like 10 minutes or in like 5 to 10 minutes, the real question was a 2D dynamic programming problem that like uses the attendance record string. So you definitely want to be very wary of that. If you're a college student though, you have a really good advantage here, which is freshman applicants, sophomore applicants, junior applicants, they're not going to get hit with questions that are particularly difficult. Otherwise, the interviewer is being unreasonable. I look back at the questions that I passed and failed when I was in college, and I could probably solve any of them right now in maybe like 20 minutes tops. And so if you can get a leg up on that and like really kind of grind out those annoying leak code problems, it can really set you apart during the interview. It won't help you get the interview because obviously you can't just say like, I'm really good at leak code, give me a chance and I'll demonstrate it to you. That would be really gutsy to try to put that on your resume. But in the interview, you know, they'll typically ask you something that's quite straightforward if you're a college student. And these are great ways to get into those bigger name companies and then like demonstrate your value as an intern later on. A lot of my peers get into these good companies and then they just stay there because they like do well over there, right? So that's kind of like my advice there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a lot of great advice. I think all really important things to consider. We've been talking a lot about technical interviews. I was wondering a little more on the behavioral side. How important are behavioral interviews really like compared to technical? And do you have any tips for doing well in them?
So yeah, I've done a few behaviorals as well. Usually there'll be a behavioral sprinkled in like the on-site if you're going for full-time. If you're an intern, they might not even bother with that. They might just give you a couple technical ones that are an hour long, and then if you pass them, you'll get the internship. In my experience, behaviorals are important in the sense that they'll filter you out if you're like a total jerk or something like that, or like they can't work with you at all. It's
in many cases, if you are too sexist or they get any vibes of that, you are also rejected. I highly encourage respecting all of your interviewers correctly. I've seen many horror stories of my male teammate who has just joined the team is shadowing my female teammate who is like much more senior than him, and the interviewee candidate is directing all of the questions to the person who has literally not said a word the interview. So be very respectful in all of your interviews to all
check
interviews.
yourself before you wreck yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, so like on that topic, it's the flip of the technical interview. Whereas like the technical interview, you need to perform perfectly, or not perfectly. You need to like pretty much execute well and communicate well in order to make it to the next round. The behavioral interview is more like the opposite, where like we're gonna catch some major red flags, but in general, like most people will be fine. Like you don't need to be like the most chipper or like cheerful person, so long as like, you know, you are able to get your work done and you're communicative and you're not like, as Mark said, like sexist or like have anger issues or something like that, then you'll typically be fine. there's nothing like I can never say, there's no interview where I would say like, oh yeah, I like the reason why I got the job was because I did well in the behavioral. It's always like I killed the technical and like the behavioral was like good. It's never like, oh, you know, I kind of flubbed up the technical, but I was just like so suave and charming and charismatic during the behavioral that they just had to have me on board. I don't think that'll ever happen, honestly, because they can find someone who can code and be all the rest of those things. So that's kind of my stance on the behavioral. Really, like, just kind of relax and don't be a total idiot, and you should be okay. Now, obviously, that's because historically I haven't had problems with this type of interview. But things that you might want to look out for, again, like respect. Like not, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, Mark, but like I've heard of like horror stories where like people somehow get political during a behavioral interview, which is just absolutely tone deaf in my opinion, because I wouldn't even get political at work, like in the workplace, even with people that I know like really well. Maybe that's just like a personal thing. Obviously, like politics and work are very intertwined together. But regardless of like how much of an activist you are or how strong your opinions are, keep it out of the behavioral interview, man. That's just not smart. Like even if they align with you, like that's just not smart. That's not like a good look for you. Yeah.
All companies' public image is that any person on anywhere in the political spectrum can work in that workplace. The execution of that is sometimes a little further from the truth, since tech generally leans fairly far left, generally. But yeah, not in the interview. You can bring it up after you.
Like either way, like no, because you want your interviewer to evaluate you on like how well they can work with you as an employee and like your technical skills, and what your political stances and stuff like that are completely irrelevant. Yeah, like, you know, it might be like a bit callous to say, but like there's like things that like like a person legitimately refuses to reconcile for whatever reason. But so long as they can just shut up about it in the behavioral interview, you'll be fine. Like just keep it to yourself, you know, and don't like bother your coworkers. And that's honestly like okay. I definitely don't have like the same views as like all of my coworkers ever, but we got along fine. So yeah.
Oh, something before we move on. On the technical interviews, at least, I think there's a lack of appreciation for the value in HackerRank grinding or leak code grinding, whatever it's called. In that pattern matching is by far the best skill you can pull out of all of the grind. And pattern matching is actually, in my opinion, one of the skills that really distinguishes like amazing engineers from just good engineers. Because I think everyone has a good opportunity to become like a good engineer, but like there's a lot of people I've worked with that I'm incredibly amazed by that can just instantly understand an architecture that I've made up from completely new. And I was like, wow, I did this. Like, wow, it's so new. And they're just like, oh yeah, I get it. Like that makes sense in like 3 seconds. I'm like, it's because they're using their past experiences, matching those patterns, and then identifying all of the differences from their experience, and then being able to understand the implications of that immediately. It's a very, very similar skill set to interviews where you have a series of a bunch of fun idioms and like things, building blocks that you can apply of just the algorithms that you unfortunately have to memorize. And then pattern matching which ones apply, how to use them, and how to use them in what order to achieve the optimal result and simplicity of the solution. If you ever get bored or feel burnt out by interviews, I would highly encourage of thinking more along the lines of what is the bigger picture here? What is the things I'm seeing a lot in these HackerRank or leak code questions? And it's just, I think that really wasn't appreciated enough, including for me as when I was in college. It just feels like you're grinding through this, like, well, I'd have to just keep typing the same things over and over. You're like, you should appreciate that you're building your habits and building your pattern matching around those things.
So you're saying that leak code is good?
No, I think leak code is still toxic. It doesn't accurately measure your performance at work, but there are relevant skills, just not literally the exact thing you're learning. It's just like you have to think one level above what am I doing in this minute. It's more of like what am I doing in all of these hours, all of these multiple, many hours of grinding.
Okay, yeah. I largely agree with that actually. I'm curious to see what like about why you think leak code is toxic. Could you like explain a little bit about that?
So I personally ask a question that does not require memorization of any algorithm. And I highly encourage all of my candidates to look up things they don't know. And that's a much more engineering oriented approach for an engineering interview question. Admittedly, my engineering question is very hard. And so you need to be a pretty good at execution to finish all of it. But like, for instance, I don't like memorization of any of the algorithms. I think memorizing dynamic programming is unnecessary for your day-to-day. I think memorizing trees is largely unnecessary for your day-to-day. Like as a concept, you should learn them. As a tool, you should learn how to apply them. Do you need to memorize the implementation? Because I've not implemented a tree in the past 4 years.
You just use the library if you have to
I've
use
not
a
used a
tree.
tree in the past 4 years.
Yeah.
But it's like, but like you find trees in so many interview questions. Like, yes, I've done graphs, but like not literally like the binary tree of all of that. And it's just
So then sorry to interrupt you, but like does that mean that the toxicity is coming from the fact that you're memorizing things that you don't find useful or relevant to like actual work?
absolutely. And I think it's just like checking off the boxes of, oh yes, I know how to use this algorithm, this algorithm, this algorithm. Like a stack is another example of like something they teach you in class, but you never actually use in all that frequency. Like it's a great learning data structure, but it's just, yeah, there's just a disconnect between what are the algorithms used in interviews and what are the algorithms used in day-to-day engineering. And I think that's frustrating, at least for me when I was interviewing and practicing it. But again, coming in with the mindset of you're developing pattern matching, and this is just also geared towards what university students know versus then like what industry knows. And so there's pros and cons of the whole interview process.
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting topic that I've been thinking about a lot, especially last year when I was doing my circuit for leak code and stuff like that. I will say that I have never really been particularly bothered by the grind before. And that's knowing that like I won't be using dynamic programming or trees or anything like that. It definitely hurts to be gatekept out of like good companies just because they happen to really enjoy asking dynamic programming problems. And you just like historically have trouble with them. That some companies' names started with G and end with Google, for example. They've asked me dynamic programming questions every single time I've interviewed with them.
Oh, no.
And I've passed some of them and others I haven't. And you might be thinking like, wow, that really sucks. Like from a college student's perspective, that really sucks. And that won't change once you're in industry because now you're like doing actual work. So you know what actual work is like. And when you want to interview again, you all of a sudden have to pull out the textbook and study these topics again. And that's coming from me, who's like early in career, who doesn't really have like anything tying him down to a particular city. The bitterness definitely grows significantly among my colleagues who are older than I am or further along in their careers, perhaps like in their 30s or even in their 40s. They have like children and families and like they've purchased property or something like that. And so they have all these responsibilities and things to do both at work and at home. And all of a sudden they're asked to, do, a tree traversal or something. And they're just like, what is this? Like I've architected like $5 million projects or something. But, all that pent up frustration is like true and valid. So if like you as a college student are already kind of feeling this, that's totally valid. But it has to do, I think like something that helped a lot is Mark's perspective of like identifying what value you're actually bringing from that, which is the pattern matching. It's not like the algorithm itself. It's the pattern matching. It's the ability to like do something quickly, to pick up concepts quickly and be able to communicate them quickly in an efficient manner. These are all like really, really important skills to have as an engineer. And so the heuristic that companies use, which is technical questions that are on leak code, it could be better, but I will say like I understand why it is done that way. And like for my personal experience, and this will vary between like 4 different students, I know like brilliant engineers that never really did leak code and kind of just studied the topics and got interviews and did perfectly fine on them. I personally grinded a lot of leak code, so I'm probably on the other end of the spectrum. I did something like 1,000 problems last year. I was doing like 2 per day every day. It sounds impressive, but it's really not, because once you start pattern matching, like they become much easier, right? And so like I got to the point where in an interview, I'd get asked a question and I'd pretty much immediately within the first like 2 or 3 minutes after clarifying some things, I'd have a decent approach. And I 100% would not be able to do that if like I didn't do all these questions. So it's kind of like a necessary evil almost, because when it comes to grinding leak code, you can always get better by doing a question. Like it's guaranteed improvement. And so like, yes, it might not be the most pleasant experience, but it is guaranteed improvement. And something that helped keep me going was like every single question that I did was basically, I'm gonna get like paid this much extra for doing this question. So that means like really like I got paid $300 or whatever to do this leak code problem. Like if like my signing bonus is this much better, right? If I do like 100 problems and my signing bonus is $10,000 better, that means each one was worth this much money, right? And that sounds really stupid. It might even like, I won't even dispute that. Like that probably is pretty stupid, but it is something that like kept me motivated to keep going. And it does feel really good when like you go in and they ask you a question and you're like, oh yeah, I got this. And then you like, you just code it out in Python, hopefully, or C++. And it feels really good because if you nail the technical, then you kind of know that you're going to get to the next round. Like in pretty much every case last year, I knew that I was going to get the next round. Like I knew I was going to get the offer, or I knew that I wasn't going to get the offer because of these performances, right? And as a college student, I know you're like super busy, whoever you are out there, but the legal questions that you're going to get asked are way easier than the ones that you're going to get asked in industry. Way easier. It's not even really close, unless like the interviewer decides to be a jerk to you for some reason because they hate college students. I don't know why. But
Or
like
some companies just do the on-site same for everybody. Sorry, guys.
maybe, yeah, like maybe that'll happen. Yeah, I've seen that happen too. But like, yeah, if you get a really hard question when you're a college student, that's pretty much like the caliber of question you're gonna get when you're in industry. So just be prepared for that.
Yeah, thank you guys for the advice there. I think, yeah, even in my like short experience interviewing, things like that, I think doing leak code and like the pattern matching has definitely helped me a lot too. So yeah, for sure there. And I guess for me personally, I've had quite a bit of experience applying for internships, but not so much for full-time positions. And I'd say it's probably the same for most college students out there. So how do you guys think the recruiting process for full-time is different than for internships, if at all?
Oh, you, James, because I did not really put much effort into my full-time job search.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because you interned at Airbnb and then just went straight there for
And I haven't left yet.
Yeah,
and I'm actually
okay.
not planning on applying for another job for 2 years. So like,
Yeah. Okay. And sorry. So the original question was, how does applying for a full-time differ from applying for internships?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So there's 2 flavors of this, and I can answer both of them. So the first flavor is after you've done your junior year internship and you're doing a full-time job search for your first real job after college. And the second flavor is what I did which was after you've been at a job for a while, how do you switch jobs? So I'll answer the first one first because it's more relevant to college students. And that is hopefully you did well at your junior year internship and you have a return offer from them, in which case, if you really like that place, then you're pretty much set, which is awesome, honestly. At the very worst, that means that you have a fallback to go to if your interview loop doesn't go well for your senior year. Otherwise, if you don't have a return offer for whatever reason, then this is going to be a pretty it's going to be a pretty nerve-wracking thing because you don't really have a fallback, right? And like a lot of people are probably in that situation. Either way, my suggestion is the summer that you are doing your junior year summer, whether you have an internship or not, you need to be hitting that grind and like really starting to get good at these questions. It really helps to get as much knowledge as you can, and it helps to get it in a time frame where you'll use it right after you gain it. Furthermore, junior year college is probably the best time because you don't have any classes or midterms to worry about. And also like you don't have immediate access to all your friends and stuff that you want to spend time with, right? There is life outside of like a job and that after all. So you want to get as much of that grinding done as possible during junior year of summer. You want to start your applications ideally before school actually starts. That way that you can start getting like responses or setting up interviews right around the time that like the interview season starts picking up. The loop for full-time jobs will usually take longer than an internship one. For an internship, after you do 2 1-hour technicals, they'll be like, yeah, okay, we want you. For full-time, that'll usually still exist, but it'll be the filter to get you to on-site. And the on-site is usually much more time intensive. If it's really on-site, then you'll have to take time to fly over there and like actually go on-site and take this like 5-hour kind of stint to do a bunch of interviews back to back. And that can be very draining, especially if you have classes going on. So you want to make sure that you have all these lined up and scheduled as early as you can. Furthermore, I'd highly recommend for your senior year fall quarter to take a very low class load if you can. I took 3 classes for my fall quarter of senior year. And like one of them was a very easy class because I knew I'd be doing a lot of interviews. That's basically like all I can say about that. Apply to as many places as possible. This is like your last time to use internship referrals as well, like people that are in your immediate vicinity. Like reach out and ask. The worst that they can say is no. The worst that the referral, the worst thing that can happen is that the referral doesn't work out. Like referrals are powerful, but they don't work out like 100% of the time either. So like this is your time. Like I thought that I was like being very proactive, and I honestly think I should have been even more proactive. So like whatever thoughts and plans you had in your head, evaluate them and like level them up again if you can. It's honestly like a very scary time, but it's also very exciting. So that's really all I have for that. In terms of switching mid, like early in career, that's like an entirely different animal because on the plus side, you don't have like this weird like timing window of like fall of your senior year. Like you don't have like that crucial time window where you have like, this is where all the companies are recruiting new grads. Now that you've got some experience under your belt, you're actually like quite a high value hire. Companies like to hire like younger engineers that have been in the industry for a few years because they have that crucial work experience. So they're not like as like greenhorned as new grads, but they're also like not like niche. They're not like specialized enough to be like, oh, they're gonna require a lot of money for this one specific skill set that we don't actually really need, right? They're still like relatively moldable in terms of experience, right? So you're like in this kind of really nice in between where you're like objectively stronger, but you're still kind of a Swiss Army knife. In my experience, as soon as I switched, like I updated my resume, made sure I had a good LinkedIn photo, make sure my LinkedIn profile was all good. I switched it from like not looking for a job to looking for a job, and like people would just, recruiters will just like spamming you. And some will be places that you've never heard of. Some will be places that like you wish you heard from in college. And you should like be responding to all of these if possible, if for no other reason than to get interview experience. I interviewed at a lot of places that I didn't necessarily actually want to work for, but it's interview experience. And if the package is good enough or the team is good enough, then maybe I'd consider it. In the worst case, I can use it as negotiation against companies that I do actually care about, right? There are other plus sides, which is you can kind of operate on your own schedule, which is nice. Like I can like study whenever I want, and I can like decide when to apply whenever I want. And so you have the freedom to do that. but don't let like your daily life prevent you from making this change. Like a lot of people I know are like, oh, I'm so busy every day and there's these things I want to do. I don't want to grind lead code, so I'm just not going to do it. And then they just like stay in their job that they don't like for a long time, which is not good, right? Yeah. So like, just apply at any time. It's really the same as it is in college, except you ideally will have a job. So no matter like how badly you fail or how badly the interview goes, you'll still have your old job, right? So that's the plus. Something in industry I think to specifically be wary of is if you have like RSUs or like stocks and stuff that are about to vest, you should consider that. If you have a promotion or something that's coming up, you should also consider that, because these are like significant amounts of money or like title experience that you may or may not be giving up if you decide to switch at a certain time. So that's something to consider. In my case, I decided to leave before my final vest, and I won't go into the details of why I did that. But that's like something that you should definitely weigh heavily on yourself as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Some
dang.
perspective. Oh, I'm
No,
sorry.
go
to
for it.
interrupt.
No, you can go for it.
Some perspective I've gained over the past couple of years is that it's a grind getting your first job, and there's honestly not much supply for like new grad jobs as much as the demand recently, and it's getting harder for everyone. When you get senior though, oh my, the demand goes way up. So this might be an entirely different podcast topic, but like the TLDR of senior is that your manager can just give you an objective and you can generally accomplish it with pretty good trust that you can accomplish it well. And the demand for senior engineers is incredibly high right now, where managers will have a core responsibility of building a network of people they reach out to and recruit them, where like it is every EM's job to recruit senior engineers, not only just the recruiting apparatus. And like I know my manager would just keep in touch with all the old engineers, all the old senior engineers at Airbnb, and keep in touch with all the people that weren't even actively looking for a job, and like just reach out to them every 6 months or so, actually build a human relationship with them. And like there's just, I could see so much effort goes into hiring senior engineers. And so the landscape changes as you develop your experience, and you can at least look forward to that eventually.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Like I'm not even a senior engineer yet. So, and like the value of someone that's like at my level, which is like 1 year short of senior basically, is it's insane. Like someone called me a couple years ago when I wasn't even looking yet. And then they called me again like a month ago asking if I was ready to move on from Microsoft yet. Which is crazy. Like that is a network that I never even like, it just fell into my lap because I wasn't even looking for it. And it's just because you found me on LinkedIn. Like, don't get me wrong, your value will also increase as you progress in your career, which is really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That does sound very nice and definitely looking forward to it when it happens. But I guess moving on a little more towards like once you secure your offers, I was wondering, I know James, you were talking a little about money and negotiation. I was wondering like when you receive an offer, should you negotiate it if possible? And then what are the best tips in negotiating an offer?
Yeah. So my view on this is, and this has changed since I left Microsoft and also since I joined Microsoft out of college, is that you should be negotiating 100% of the time. In fact, if you don't negotiate, a recruiter might assume that there's something wrong with you. And that's because, and like, I know that that might be like weird because there's all sorts of thoughts like imposter syndrome, or like, am I really worth enough? Or like, are engineers overpaid in general? Whatever your flavor of doubt or disbelief is. But the fact of the matter is like, there's nothing wrong with advocating for a higher salary for yourself. There's absolutely nothing, because like if you're proud of the work that you do, and you're proud of like the effort that you're putting in, then there's like zero shame in asking for more. So in my view, like if you get an offer, even if you're like an intern, even if you think like, oh, I'm not really in a negotiating position, at the very least, what you should do is try. Just if for nothing else, similar to the interview experience, just to get the experience of how to negotiate an offer. Like you definitely should try. Now, a couple of things that will definitely help is if you have multiple offers to bounce or to like on the table, that is like an entirely new dimension than if you only have one offer. If you only have one offer, then yes, there is a certain point to like, okay, there's really no point in negotiating because I have to take this no matter what, right? But even then, like you should still be negotiating for something if you can. And like that's just like a matter of like, this is if you think about it, this is like your biggest opportunity to get a bump, like before you actually start working. This is like one of the few chances that you'll get maybe once every year, once every couple of years, to like really get a bump in like your paycheck, right? So why not? Like you got to grab onto those chances with both hands. It's not like companies will be happy to pay you less than you're worth if you're quote unquote happy with that, right? So make them a little uncomfortable is what I say. And I think like they'll respect you more for it, so long as you're not obnoxious or like completely delusional. But I feel like it's very hard to be that way. In my experience, like most people are the opposite, where they undervalue themselves. So in terms of negotiating, having multiple offers, without a doubt, like makes things way better. But also like you want to be wary of fixating on a particular number. If you, for example, say if sometimes recruiters like the recruiter, it's like a cat and mouse game almost, because the recruiter definitely wants you. It's in their best interest to hire you, but they want to hire you for like the lowest price that you're willing to say yes to. So it's very, very tricky. Like you both know what's going on, and you're both like putting on this like these pleasantries. And to a certain extent, it is good because it's like, yeah, like this will be great. But there's also like a little bit of like weird like tension there when you're negotiating. So definitely try to avoid fixating on a specific number. For example, if I said, oh, I'd be happy with like a 50K pay bump, and I'm currently getting paid 150K, then all of a sudden the recruiter who is prepared to offer me 300K is like, holy crap, like this guy is going to take 100K lowball and be happy. That's actually incredible. And you won't even know until maybe later you check levels FYI, or one of your friends like goes like, oh, damn, you just screwed yourself over. You won't even know, right? So try to avoid fixating yourself on a number in conversation. Number two is do your research. So check out salaries of people like in similar positions at the similar company. Take a look on levels.fyi. Take a look on, what was that one toxic like forum for CS people? Do you know, Mark?
CS.
Not CS career questions.
Okay.
That's
It's
Reddit.
also toxic, but fun to look at.
It's the one that's like where everyone's anonymous and you have to have your corporate email.
Blind?
Yeah. Blind. Thanks. Yeah, that place is also pretty toxic. But
yeah, I think
what it is useful for is for whatever reason people really like flexing their salaries on it. So like if they're getting paid that much, then it's like, okay, this is maybe an idea of like what I could get. So like avoid hard committing, avoid committing to anything in writing, ideally. And it's easier to leverage for things like sign-on bonus or stock awards, or even like things like vacation time, if that's even a thing, than it is to leverage like an actual salary value. Typically at like lower levels, there's a range of salary where like there's a cap that someone of your particular level is allowed to get. And recruiters won't go higher than that. So for me, like I typically like leverage the stock value, and if the salary is like could be higher, then I'll also try to work that into the conversation. I do have a.
Oh, go ahead, James.
All right, no, go ahead. I have a story after this. Yeah.
On salary, the industry is moving towards more equitable ways of dealing with the whole compensation package, and so salary is actually becoming more and more fixed. Like actually, when I was interviewing it, or when I accepted the offer at Airbnb, I couldn't even negotiate for a free hoodie because they just kept telling me your offer is fixed. And so like I just like kind of like just had the offer in the background and just like doing other things and telling the recruiter that, and like to the point where she wasn't even convinced that I was going to join the company. But it's just, I don't know where I was going with this. Oh, salary is fixed. Highly encourage you to go for equivalent cash value in stock package or signing bonus or extra vacation times, as James mentioned. But I think salary is harder and harder to negotiate nowadays because of equity.
Yeah. But on that topic, so I do have a story, which is how I negotiated Roblox. When I got the Roblox offer, I had several other offers on the table. And their initial offer, when they called me and offered, like, extended the verbal offer, is that if I accepted the verbal offer as it was with the numbers that they gave to me over the phone, then they would like put it in writing and send it over for me to sign, right? And I asked if it was negotiable, and they said no. And like they basically said, like, there's no way we can negotiate. This is what you're gonna get. Take it or leave it. Like, you can either verbally agree now and we'll send you the paperwork, or you can think about it for a little while and then we'll call you again later. But either way, it's fixed. And so what I said was, that's kind of sad. Like that's disappointing, because I was really excited to work with you guys, right? Which I was. Like, I'm not lying about that. And so I told them to just let me think about it for a while. And lo and behold, like, that was on Friday. Multiple people on that call, 3 people on that call, like Zooming me face to face, 3-on-1, telling me that it wasn't negotiable. And all of a sudden, like, I receive an email the next morning on Saturday from the recruiter saying, okay. Like, we could get you like extra equity, or we could get you extra salary, and you can pick one. But the problem with that was even if I got both of them, there was like another offer that could technically beat beat that money in terms of like pure money, right? And so like I let them know that was the case. Like, and on Sunday the recruiter responds with, okay, I'll see what I can do. Monday, like, the recruiter says, okay, you can get like we made it work, you can get both, and you're good to go. And then on Tuesday I signed. So like, when people say like it's fixed and there's no negotiation possible, take it or leave it. If you really do have a chip to play, like, sometimes you just gotta like hold and like delay the decision-making process a little while longer, right? And if you think about it, like, it's completely reasonable to do that, because this is a life-changing decision for you. Like, it'll decide where you work, potentially which city you go to, right? It'll decide a lot of things about like the way your life is going to go. So like, if you ask for extra time and they don't give it to you, that's pretty much a red flag. So they have to give it to you. So like, by giving this impression like that you do have other offers that you are strongly considering, and the best way to do this is to actually have strong offers that you're actually considering, then that in and of itself is a very strong negotiation tactic. And really for me, it was like, I just like didn't talk very much. It was just like, okay, I guess like, if you can't do that, that's unfortunate, but that makes my decision harder, because otherwise, like, it would be easier if something happened, right? And I wasn't specific about what needed to happen, and then they came up with something that I was happy with, right? So it's like it's a very interesting and difficult like thing to navigate. But long story short is like, you definitely want to have experience doing this, without a doubt. Like, this year was probably the first time I got real experience with like multiple offer negotiation, which was really scary. But now that I've done it, like, it feels nice, and you definitely want to put yourself in this kind of position. And this is something that Mark alluded to a lot before, which is, once you get like one like really good offer, they kind of just start like coming in. Like, all of a sudden everyone wants to interview you. And so like, if you're not quite there yet, don't be discouraged at all. That was literally like the case for me. Like, all of my friends were getting these internships at great places, and I wasn't, because of whatever reason. Like, I wasn't proactive enough, or my grades weren't good enough, or whatever. Like, these aren't necessarily true, by the way. These are just reasons that might be affecting you. But like, as soon as like it happened for me once, which was like the Microsoft offer, that allowed me to like catapult myself forward into further success, right? And so it might seem from an external perspective that like someone might be like so far away from you. Like, this guy gets all these offers, this guy's doing all this, like, he must be crazy. And it really isn't. Like, that was literally like me when I was a junior in college. Like, that was legitimately like how I was, right? So like that, like, I know a lot of this topic might be like very scary and stressful for people, but I think the very like important thing that I want people to take away from this is like to just like bravely charge forward and try like as hard as you can. Like you don't know like how hard you can possibly try. Like you don't actually know. Like I didn't know that I could do 1,000 problems. You don't actually know, right? Just like charge forward and try and like believe in yourself, and eventually something will happen. Like actually, like I know it sounds like cliche and cheesy and stuff, but legitimately that's it. I just like brute force problems until eventually I like pass some interviews. And it's definitely doable.
Speaking from like my peers, at least, everyone that I know at graduated CS got a job that they're happy with eventually. It might not happen at the same time frame that you want. It might not happen at everyone had found success somewhere.
Yeah, that is definitely very reassuring to hear. Yeah, especially like being in college and everything being pretty unknown. But yeah, kind of to wrap up with a final question. I guess once you have all of these offers, what do you think are the most important factors to consider when deciding which company you want to join?
So I'm a very number-based person. I actually evaluated all of the factors in terms of dollar amounts and then summed up that with the total compensation from the offer. So for instance, I really want to live in SF. I really like my team that I interned with. I really like the work and the company, and like I like the future growth potential. And like there's all these things that I just actually put into numbers, and then I compare, like I summed up the total offer, and I was like, oh wait, this doesn't really feel right for this factor, and so I adjusted that. And it's a series of iterations until I actually just like, wow, this total offer for Airbnb is like, in my own heuristics, much better than the other ones because I made up all the heuristics as well. But as to what I alluded to, like the important things are definitely, I think it might be stupid, or a bit harsh to say, but like going for a prestigious company definitely will give you enough clout to get your resume at least approved at all the other companies. But after that, I would say you should find really strong enjoyment with your work. So you have a sustainable career and sustainable life. You should make sure that you are prepared for the work-life balance of the company you're going to. You should make sure that there's enough growth in that area for you as an engineer and as you want for your career, and make sure you like the city that you're moving to. I'm probably missing a lot of this stuff. Do you have thoughts, James?
Yeah, like you hit a lot of points. I think here, like what the word that stuck out there was heuristic, right? Which is like a good way of putting it. Different people value different things more. For example, I personally value work-life balance a lot, which actually means that there's a lot of companies that I know that I would probably I know almost for a fact that I would not really be happy at, regardless of how well they pay me. So that like factors in. But like money, prestige, like these are all like the very obvious things because everyone is going for them, right? So without a doubt, if you're going for like a safe route, I'd say like a big company, you can't really go wrong early in career because you can pretty much go from a big company like Meta or Apple or Amazon or Microsoft or Facebook, or I said Meta already, or Google, right? You can go from these companies to like almost anywhere you want. And so that's like very, very powerful. I wouldn't value that as much like now since I'm out of my first job. But for the first one, that's pretty good. Salary is also like pretty big because if you can get like a good starting salary, that's kind of like the baseline that you're working with future salaries. And that might even like color your own perspective based on like the anchor point that you set for yourself. So that's pretty important. Without a doubt, you do want to like enjoy the city that you're living in. You might even go as far as considering who else is going to be at that city. I lived in Seattle for 3 years. And there's like some UCLA people there, but they're not nearly as many as there are in the Bay, unfortunately, because Seattle is like Amazon, Microsoft, and a lot of people that work there ended up going to the Bay Area office to work for Amazon and Microsoft. So there aren't actually too many people there. That's just something to consider. Another thing to consider is like if you have like a girlfriend or boyfriend or something like that, and they're going to a company, probably like plan around that to make sure you're in the same city so you don't have to do long distance and stuff like that. What else?
I'd like to interject. Long distance can sometimes work.
I'm not gonna touch that. I'm not touching that. What else? I think something to bring up is I thought like the balance of like your team versus the work was like 80-20 in terms of like the topic needs to be really interesting. But I found that like if you do not work well with your team, you'll be pretty miserable. Like the people that you directly work with actually impact the experience of your career a lot. That's really all I really want to go into for that. But that's something that you really want to consider. Yeah.
Is there anything you can do to predict the team that you're going to, unless you've already interned there, though?
It's hard to say, but you can definitely, for example, tell things like about velocity and how quickly you can like progress. For me in particular, I think what I didn't like was when I joined like as an intern and as a full-time, I saw some really strong engineers, and they were thinking about like upward trajectories. They were measuring it in like 5 years, 10 years and stuff like that, which was kind of crazy to me because when I was there for my 3rd year, they were saying like, oh, you've only been here for 3 years. Whereas my perspective was I've already been here for 3 years. And that's the perspective of a lot of places in the Bay, actually. So that was like definitely something that I noticed when I first started working there, right? So you can kind of tell stuff like that earlier on. Yeah.
Makes sense. For like context, I've actually am the most tenured person on my team, meaning I've literally seen every single other person on my team quit and be replaced by somebody else. I've always found like there's a group of people on my team I really enjoy working with, and honestly just enjoy hanging out with. Like I've been playing board games and getting drinks with people on my team for all 4 years, even as people keep shifting in and out. So
Nice.
yeah, maybe I'm just a friendly person, but I've always found like I can find people in the team that I enjoy working with a lot.
Most of the people younger than me quit within their 1st year. So
Oh God.
And then people that were like older than me left for other places too. So yeah. I think it was like it's interesting because like it was more like a lot of my coworkers had like children or like nephews or whatever that were my age. So I was always like, it was always an interesting dynamic at work. Yeah.
I've learned a lot from like my older coworkers who have like experience like with like the Windows days of like the old yore and how they had the same problems but just different shapes as today.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Anything else?
Nope, that's pretty much it for me. So yeah, Mark and James, it's been a pleasure having you guys on the show today. Do you guys have any like last words of advice for the viewers?
Mark?
Oh, I was not prepared for this question. Do you have anything, James?
Yeah. I know that this is like a job hunt kind of thing. And I've alluded to this multiple times during the podcast. But I think it's most important to make sure that like you're like chasing your own happiness, and you're not like comparing yourself excessively to other people and where they're at. That's something that I did a lot when I was in college and like throughout my life, just because of the way that I was brought up. At the end of the day, like the person that you want to compare yourself against is who you were yesterday. And no matter like how bad or how good of a position you think that you're in right now, you can always like in this moment, like in this day today, like do something to improve or like make yourself better, right? And so long as you're doing that, then you should be like proud of yourself. And you know, maybe like one day that'll be I land a job offer at a great company and I like double my salary. That would be an insane day, right? But then maybe like another day is like I did my laundry today, or you know, I hopefully I took a shower today. Hopefully you're taking a shower every day. But like depending on where you are mentally or like where you are at in your life, that progress can be different for everyone. And so like all of this advice is like keep in mind that you're doing it for yourself, for like a better life for yourself, right? So you won't necessarily even be in CS later on, so like try not to stress too much about it is really what I want to say.
Yeah, that's absolutely the healthy mindset. Something that I've developed actually in the past couple of years, like after I missed my promotion the first time, I realized I was way too hung up about it. And ever since that, I've made a lot of progress in dissociating my career from my identity, which maybe is something a little too early if you haven't even started your career, but like so many of my peers are just like, yes, I need to succeed in my career so people can like think I'm a good person. I'm like, no, just optimize for your own happiness, like James was saying earlier. Like I've developed so many hobbies and really, really put my time into them. And I'm happier now because of that. And like now I'm confident, like I'm planning on taking a like 6 to 12 months sabbatical and just not working. And I'm confident in that I will enjoy myself because I've invested so much into myself outside of my career, outside of like relationships with other people. It's just I like myself at this point, and that's huge. I think that's way more important to me than like what my job is.
Yeah, that's really important. I think, yeah. So this may or may not be like projecting or assuming, but a lot of CS students or a lot of UCLA students, at least in my view, are extremely like achievement based, where like you need to be achieving this or that in order to like people derive like their self-value from achieving things or hitting milestones. And that's not like a bad way to live, because that's the way that I also am. Like it's good because it enables you to move forward, right? Something about like real life and like industry is that these major milestones don't happen as frequently for you anymore. Like in college, there's a lot of things that are happening, like on any given year, right? Moving through from freshman year to sophomore year is a big step. Sophomore to junior, same way. Junior to senior, these are all like big changes, right? Whereas in industry, like it definitely doesn't necessarily like pan out to be that way. And so it might be a bit jarring hitting real life from that, especially if you're particularly active with stuff in college. But then the important thing is to like kind of make sure that you are developing like yourself and your identity as well. That's like general life advice and not like career finding advice though. So
yeah, so building on that, I think
yes.
Having achievements that are internally owned and not externally evaluated is the best way to find consistent development and progress that is reliable and not emotionally risky. For example, waiting for a promotion, that's externally evaluated. You can do the work to get there, but like it's at the end of the day, it's externally evaluated and you have little control over that. But like you can be proud of the progress you've made and you can recognize the growth you've developed. And like I've been like doing a lot of like just non-CS things and like I'm really proud of that too. And so really just setting goals that can be individually achieved without relying on like others' evaluations is a much healthier way to look at it, in my opinion. It's tricky though, because you do want the things that other people evaluate you for. So you just got to figure out your own prioritization framework.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, thank you guys so much for all that advice. I think we got a lot of good career advice today, but also a lot of good life advice, which is good. But yeah, again, thank you so much, Mark and James, for your time and sharing your perspectives and experiences with all of us today. And thank you to the viewers who watched this episode to the end. We'll be having a lot more episodes like this in the future, so watch out for those when they get released. And yeah, I was your host, Yili. Hope you guys enjoyed.